Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for taking the time to attend IDC, Singtel, and Cisco's live webcast on digital acceleration, architecting for resiliency. My name is Tammy, and I will be the host for today's webinar. Before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen are multiple application engagement tools you can use. All the engagement tools are resizable and movable, so feel free to test them out. You can also expand your slide area or maximize it to full screen by clicking on the arrows in the top right corner. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can submit them through the Q&A text box below the media player. If you wish to get a copy of the presentation, you may flag this request there as well. We will try to answer most questions during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or if we run out of time, it will be answered via email. Please know we do capture all questions. Finally, I would like to call your attention to the survey button. IDC, Singtel, and Cisco would like to know what really matters to your organization through a few short questions. We encourage you to share your feedback with us, and you may take the survey at any time. Again, for those who have just joined us, welcome to IDC, Singtel, and Cisco Digital Acceleration Architecting for Resiliency webcast. Now that I'm done with the housekeeping items, I would like to introduce the speaker for the session. First up, I have Linus Lai, Vice President, Software and Services, IDC Asia Pacific. He will be the keynote presenter and the moderator for this webcast. I would also like to welcome the Singtel and Cisco panelists, Fiona Chua, Associate Director, Business Products, Singtel, and Dennis Modus, Regional Manager for SD-WAN, Asia Pacific, Japan, and China, Cisco Systems. And with that, I would like to hand the time over to you, Linus. Linus, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Tammy. So I want to talk to you today about a couple of things that are on my mind, particularly now that we are entering into a recession, and how organizations intend to drive a lot of technology to obviously minimize the impact of the recession, but also drive some new capabilities for the future. So if you remember this cartoon, and some of you may have seen this cartoon circulating on the internet or in your social media, it's very simple, really. Organizations who had already decided to plan for digital transformation and are executing on their digital transformation strategy are probably in a much better place than those who haven't, right? And, in order to look at whether this is really happening and, just move it beyond a cartoon, we actually ran a survey, and this is part of our COVID bi-monthly surveys that we run in the region. And what we found was indeed that digital transformation is on the cards. And most of the organizations who responded in our survey said that, yes, we're going to invest in technology to close the gaps in our transformation and execution. So think about any company that you work in today, or some of your peers in the financial services industry, the manufacturing industry, in retail, in insurance, and you'll suddenly see, that trend really start to happen, because many of the CIOs I speak to say that, we're actually accelerating, in some cases, even 10 years worth of transformation in a single year. And this was actually from Qantas in Australia. However, there are some organizations in the yellow bar who said that we will invest in technology to mitigate the impact of the recession. And how you basically read this is, they're basically saying that we will use technology to employ some cost-cutting measures in our business. Now, when we look at digital maturity across the region, and you can see the 5 stages of maturity here on that axis, you'll start to see a trend appear, because those who said that we will use technology to mitigate the impact of the recession are on the left. So they're obviously using technology to cut down on costs, right, and drive more efficiency in the business. And those that say that we will invest, and that was a very small percentage, if you notice in the previous chart, in technology to introduce new disruptive models, are right there on the right. But by and large, if you remember that large blue bar at the top, We will invest in technology to close the gaps in our transformation. These are organizations who are in either stage 2, 3, or 4, right, of their transformation journey. So they haven't really, in some cases, they're just moving from proof of concepts and pilots into, scaling it across the entire enterprise. And this is, their aspirations in the region. Now, there are going to be challenges for sure, and the challenge is not technology. In our surveys, the challenge is always going to be a couple of other things other than technology. And the first challenge is going to be governance. The second, it's going to be skills to realize this. It's going to be change management practices. It's going to be risk as well, to understand risk and to be able to assess the risk as well. And then you've got technology challenges as well, such as legacy investments, and then sourcing challenges as well, for, the need to source for external service providers in some cases. So what has this impacted from a long-term IT strategy perspective, right? So the first 3 points on that bar chart is something that I want to draw your attention to. And the first one is, organizations said that we will move more data and applications and workloads to the cloud more aggressively, right? And this was right smack in the middle of the pandemic just a couple of months ago. The second priority is we will drive more investments in automation. Now, it's not just automation in IT, on the IT operations side of things, but it's automation across the business. So to drive much more consistent, right, and reliable responses, right, to customer experiences in some cases. The third area is to implement agile processes and plans, right, for risk aversion. So this whole idea of, this long life cycle of projects and moving from waterfall to agile and DevOps is suddenly become much, much more important on the agenda for the enterprise. So when you think about it, enterprises, indicate that remote work management, managing security risks, aggressive automation, rapid cloud adoption, and vendor management are all on the cards again. Now, I want to talk a little bit about innovating at cloud scale, because when we talk to CIOs as well, what we realize is that most of them are now moving from what we'd call the role of a back office and front office curator to now an innovator of experiences, right? So if you think about it, most of your products and services for 2021 or 2022 are going to have either software components or data components, right, to drive customer experiences in them. So if you're an insurance company, you'll have a lot more data and knowledge about how your customers behave, right, from a risk perspective. And that's going to feed into your products and services for the future as well. So the role of the CIO is definitely changing. And the technologies that we have today allow us to scale tremendously even from a subscription basis, if you think about cloud, to the edge, and to even further beyond the edge with the introduction of 5G technologies. So this is going to be, I think, a very tremendous time for a lot of opportunity, but at the same time, some fair amount of risk as well. Now, when we think about networking transformation strategies, and this was a survey that we conducted in May of this year, across the Asia-Pac region, we noticed that priorities under the COVID scenario were somewhat different from network transformation priorities in the long term. So if you take a look at the top 3 on the left, is to optimize remote work connectivity and experiences, right? And this was obviously the shift in the remote work. The second area was in network and security convergence through initiatives such as SASE. And the third area was on cloud connectivity optimization, obviously as we shifted much more data and workloads to the cloud in the short term. Now, in the longer term, if you notice even the top 3 or even the top 4 or 5 of them, you'll notice a trend start to emerge here. You'll notice a trend towards software-defined networking, right? As loosely as the term we could use. And in some cases, it's very clearly through initiatives such as SD-WAN to optimize work and connectivity experiences, but also to drive security and cloud connectivity as well. But all in all, the role that software-defined architectures can play in the network space, I think will converge with the cloud and edge technologies to drive these customer experiences that I talked about earlier. Now let's take a look at some of the, and let's take a look at SD-WAN again, right? And if you remember, SD-WAN was quite a hot topic about 2 years ago, and it was even in the context of substitution. But then we realized that it wasn't a substitute technology, right? It was, to drive a lot of benefits in the network and to drive a lot of lower transport costs as well. So why SD-WAN again, in this context? And a couple of many reasons here. And some of the things that really, pop up from a relook at SD-WAN here are areas such as improved resilience, making real-time configuration changes as we rely and lean more on cloud services, right, and microservices architectures. And in some cases as well, it can be delivered as a fully managed service today. So, and of course, the improved security that managed SD-WAN services can bring as well as you drive more workloads and data to the cloud. So this is some of the reasons, that are somewhat a little bit different from the reasons that we had chosen SD-WAN about 1 or 2 years ago. Now in the region, and I'm just going to pick up some countries in Southeast Asia here. If you look at some of the priorities from a SD-WAN perspective, in countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand, improving security is a key capability and priority. And then in, again, countries like Philippines and Singapore, improving the remote work experience and improving network resilience are key priorities today as well. So if you think about it, we're no longer thinking about SD-WAN in the context of price and cost alternatives, or benefit alternatives. We're thinking about it in the context of security. We're thinking about it in the context of experiences and network resiliency as well as we move to multiple clouds. So let's take a look at and switch gears and take a look at service provider sourcing, this whole idea of how do you choose your service provider. One thing that has appeared quite important during this time was the need to relook at the services sourcing and the agreements and the contracts that we have with many services providers. So the question we asked during the crisis was, has your organization, and that's the pie chart on the upper left-hand corner, had to change your IT sourcing strategy due to the COVID crisis? And 70% said yes. This is either due to a disruption with your current service provider that had led you to consider other sourcing alternatives. And there are many situations that allow for that, including networking and virtual desktop, for example. In the pie and below, the question was, will your organization be sourcing, right, or consider sourcing IT services from a new provider? And about 50% say yes. Now, the bar chart on the right tells us a story of consolidation. So if you can just ignore the ones on the yellow, which has no impact at all, and look at the ones in orange and red versus the one in blue and green, you see a lot more orange and red than blue and green. And what essentially this bar chart is saying is that there's going to be some form of consolidation because 75% of enterprises surveyed said that they were not just going to look at their sourcing strategy, but they were also going to consolidate the number of service providers, whether in managed services providers or even in cloud services providers. So when it comes to sourcing, we've noticed some very interesting things happening in the managed services space. And we noticed over the years, managed services grew from outsourcing, and into discrete managed services. But now we notice that managed services carry with it 6 very important characteristics for the enterprise. And the first one is the value that the enterprises can get from the managed services relationship. So it's not about cost takeout, it's about value, and driving higher business value integration. The second area that we started to notice was this idea of standardization as well. As organizations went into their second generation and even third generation of managed services contracts, they also decided that this is a good time to move to standardize either service management frameworks or technologies or architectures to allow them to drive more automation in platforms and toolings, right, across various architectures. So standardization came up to the top of the pile again after many years. The third area was in the area of services lifecycle, and it was no longer, okay, here's your mess for less, but essentially, let's think about managed services in the context of architecting, developing, testing, deploying, and the ongoing management of these environments to effectively move away, right, from a legacy environment into an agile environment. The fourth area was in the areas of capabilities. So we're looking at adding on capabilities such as security, integration, and innovation. The fifth area was in the area of modernization. So while obviously you have technology stacks that needed to be managed, there was also a conscious decision in the managed services relationship and contract to try to shift, right, some of these into much more modern and agile frameworks as well. And lastly, innovation as well. Innovation is one of the key decision points when selecting a managed services provider. So again, choosing a service provider that demonstrates innovation in both the platform, the technology, and the automation capabilities seems to be on the cards again as well. So very, very different types of managed services relationships, obviously. So what's expected of the next generation of managed services providers? Now, we run the services sourcing survey every year, and every year we get different responses. But the way to read this chart is to read it from the left to the right. And the one that's most important from a capability perspective is on the left and the least on the right, although they're all important. So if you take a look at it from the left, it's strong security credentials and expertise. The second one, which has come up strongly over the years, is strong analytics, automation, and AI enablement capabilities. Think about AI ops, for example. The third area is open capabilities. So not just open source, obviously, but what I talked about earlier in terms of standardization, and using things like APIs, container technologies, and platforms that interop with each other. The fourth area, and this used to be a very hot area about 2 years ago, was customer centricity. So, shielding your service provider organization from how they act and behave in all their departments and all their intricacies, and just focusing on the customer centricity and the customer outcomes was very, very important about 2 years ago. So imagine dealing with a very large services provider with multiple departments, driving data center, network, security, applications, and then you can think of, the kind of bill that you're kind of going to get at the end of the day, right? So customers were a bit wary of that 2 years ago, and they still are for sure, and they do want customer centricity when dealing with their services provider. So get the job done, right? Whether it's the cloud team, the network team, or the security team. The fifth area was in consulting capabilities. The sixth area was in pricing, and I'm not just talking about low cost here. I'm talking about the ability to tie price to value. And this is usually through as a service or a subscription model as it stands nowadays. And then lastly, the ability to orchestrate as well, to drive, this hybrid environment that many of us are using today. So and this is my second last slide, when you consider, right, recontracting or looking for new services providers, you need to think about all of the types of levers that you can pull and push right across the spectrum of what you would expect, right? And these are just some examples. These are 9 very important examples. So if you think about the one on the left, for example, in rigidity versus flexibility, if all you're looking for is a virtual machine and you're just looking for a very specific type of virtual machine and you just want to pay by the hour for those virtual machines, then that would be a very rigid type of sourcing consideration, right? And that you're going to drive more on the cost outcomes, you're looking for a product rather than an experience outcome. So when you have your conversations with your services providers, that you have many levers to play with, ranging from technology SLAs to business outcomes, from maintenance to innovation, from treating your service provider as a supplier or as a partner, having reports from your technology services management, or instead of having reports, driving more insights and analytics into what can be done, right, to optimize your environment. And then there's service management. Some of us are very happy with the ticketing-based service management capabilities, but others want perhaps more autonomous and AI ops capabilities, and some perhaps want leasing attached to it or subscription models attached to it. Now, there is no right or wrong answer. The goal here is not to shift all the levers up, because that is well, just not practical and perhaps not aligned to how your culture and your business operates as well from an IT services management perspective. So the whole idea is to match, obviously what you have with your service provider's capability, and that is what I call a culture match. Now, lastly, in my final slide, I just want to round up with 4 very simple recommendations. Firstly, again, back on the table with openness, with standardization, with software-defined capabilities, and that drives architectural flexibility as we move, again, much more data and applications to the cloud. The second guidance I want to talk about is obviously looking at a service provider and a vendor that has the breadth of capabilities. You've seen that, again, from a managed services perspective, it's not just, hey, manage this CPE of this, SKU or brand, but, how do we drive innovation? How do we move and modernize some of these capabilities as well? The third area is in the area of automation and intelligence. There's only so much, people you can throw into a problem, particularly in the space of security. And this is where, obviously, as you move towards software-defined constructs, you'll find automation and intelligence drive a better outcome for some of the for infrastructure services that you run. And lastly, to have a clear evolutionary roadmap as well, right? SD-WAN, in this example, is not a end state. It's obviously a key capability that's software-defined and can drive a lot more capabilities in the future as you push the innovation away from your data center into the cloud, into the edge with 5G technologies as well. So thank you so much for your time and attention. And I'd like to really open up for the question and answers at this point in time. So I'm going to shift to the panel discussion right now and ask Fiona and Danny Smolders to maybe introduce themselves, take a few minutes to introduce themselves. Fiona, over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Fiona from Singtel. I take care of product management and the business product over here at Singtel. Yeah.
Thanks, Fiona. Danny?
Hi, and my name is Danny, and I lead a team that basically lives, eats, and breathes SD-WAN for a living, and I run that team across APJC for Cisco.
Great to have you here, Fiona and Danny. Now, I have a question, and we're going to take questions from the floor. So as those are coming in, and I'll get Tammy to organize those, I do want to start off with a couple of questions because, you deal with customers as much as I do as well. Do let us know, and this is directed to Fiona, some of the key reasons why network transformation is on the agenda again, right? Ever since COVID-19 started. Could you perhaps tell us a story?
I think especially in the retail segment, we actually do see enterprises trying to fast forward their digitalization efforts, and they find ways to streamline business operations. And also due to this uncertainty, they seek network solutions that could help them react, to changes with agility, whether is it from a scaling perspective, if they need to scale down due to, shop closure or scale up, when business becomes better. And we really do see that a lot of these decisions are made based on finding solutions that allow them to, shift IT workloads over to the cloud, so that they have the agility and the flexibility to react to changes. Yeah, when they need to, when they need to. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned a retail example, right?
Yeah.
So, Danny, how does this fit into the overall digital transformation narrative that we've been seeing accelerate from your perspective?
Well, accelerate is the right word here, right? We've been talking about digital transformation probably for a few years now, and I'm sure many of the audience have heard it to the tune of way too many times. We've really seen that shift to what we call digital acceleration, digital adoption, and in some cases, digital survival, right? And many companies had a strategy in place that was focused on the customer. And that makes sense, right? How do you keep your business afloat? How do you digitize your business? And that was already in place. However, what COVID-19 has exposed is that quite a few companies were not ready to do the same thing with the back office, meaning how do you get and maintain your employees engaged with your business? And so that's definitely one thing that, that we've seen evolve from an acceleration perspective. When I talk about adoption, you mentioned somewhere in your slides, Linus, that the regulatory framework is often an obstacle or an element that slows things down. Well, I'll give you one example. Here in ASEAN, we had a bank that said, look, we're in a very cash-driven economy, and with the lockdown, people can no longer go out and withdraw cash from ATMs. So how do we address that? And so what we saw was, there was a regulatory framework that made it possible for, to have remote or mobile ATMs. So we had ATMs on the back of a truck going to rural places so that people could withdraw money and still, have access to funds. So that definitely is one example. Another that comes to mind is one of our call center customers that all of a sudden could no longer have agents come into the center or into the office to do their jobs, and they would have to start working from home. So how do you make sure that, customers can interact if they're locked down? How do you make sure that the back office employees, like these call center agents, stay engaged and can continue to do their jobs and do so in a way that is consistent and still delivers, what I would say a user experience that is sufficient to do their jobs properly? So for sure, those are the elements that we see from a digital transformation perspective.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I do remember a couple of banks here also faced similar problems that you mentioned. Danny, if I could just follow up with that and take a look, take a magnifying glass at SD-WAN again, because is there a reason why it's come up again as a preferred solution? You saw the survey results, right? It's a preferred solution for the longer term for network transformation. So why do you think this architecture has come up again?
Look, in networking, and for those of you that have been in networking long enough, some things change and some things do not change. And the two things that do not change is that we're expecting any-to-any connectivity and that we want to have a better user experience. And whether that user is a customer or an employee, those are the two elements that do not change. What has changed is that any-to-any has become a lot more complicated, a lot more complex, right? There's other technologies that come into place. The cloud, even though we call it a virtual place, becomes a real place. We see companies evolving to, the virtual branch becoming the most important branch. So what do you put in place to address all of that, right? Acceptance of cloud, multi-cloud, convergence of network and security, doing all of that in an agile way. And I know all of these are buzzwords, but they are addressing real problems. And so what I would like this audience not to forget is SD-WAN is a journey, right? It's sort of a guide on this digital transformation journey. Nobody goes to bed tonight and says, hey, tomorrow I'll do some SD-WAN, right? And it's really sitting down with a partner such as Singtel, and you really plot where your outcome, where your destination is. And what you'll find is it will rely more and more on networking technologies, right? Be it, what you're using today, or be it involving cloud, or be it hybrid, right? It's a journey. All of those answers lie in SD-WAN. And what has come up, and we pointed out with your survey, Linus, is the security concerns, right? You have to make sure that as we connect more things and more people to the network, it creates more attack vectors. We have to make sure that all of these things are secure, and it doesn't necessarily be addressed with putting a firewall everywhere, because that's an additional box. It requires additional management. It's prone to errors. So that's where the automation comes into place, and where rather than looking at what is the kind of security I want for a box, or what is the kind of security I want for a location, let's look at the profile of the users and what kind of profile of users do we have in a particular location, and what kind of security do we need with that. And if you marry that with a zero trust approach, you've come to what you call secure SD-WAN, or what's becoming more and more popular is called SASE, S-A-S-E.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks for that, Danny. And I love how you gave some of the examples there. A question to Singtel, because I know Singtel can relate to this. In the survey, we also saw, particularly during the peak of COVID, the strategic IT intent shift very clearly towards moving data and workloads to the cloud. Right. So how has cloud maturity and sourcing, right, impacted on this whole idea of customer and employee experiences? And more importantly, from your perspective, because you do have cloud services solutions as well, how has networking come to the rescue when we start to see more use of clouds?
I think as enterprise really step up with their cloud adoption and progressively increasing their reliance on cloud resources as a flexible consumption model to allow them to scale IT workloads with agility, to react to business changes. But many are not really ready to fully embrace cloud due to maybe legacy systems, legacy processes. And when they look at half of their workloads into the cloud, half of it on-prem, what they are currently, it actually introduces a network complexity, and it doesn't mean that they shouldn't look for means to make their network more agile, because they really need it in this uncertainty. So that's where, because of hybrid networking, a lot of enterprise are turning to networking solutions to help them bridge this gap, and they look at SD-WAN to provide a consistent experience. So what do we see our customers using SD-WAN in such hybrid networking situation is that they use it for this configurable policy-based routing to allow them to optimize network performance on hybrid networking, right? They use traffic steering to prioritize critical business applications during high-load situations, allow them to react with agility, be flexible. And of course, with the help of the end-to-end visibility, it gives them the actionable insights to further tweak and improve the WAN experience, so that the cloud experience and the network experience come together to provide a network that can help them support and put together an infrastructure that is both agile and flexible for them to react to changes, react to needs, to drive the business outcome that they're looking at. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much. Now, I have a question on security, because there's a question from the audience as well on this one. So remember how we talked about from an innovation standpoint, as workloads move out of the data center, and you were pretty good in describing how networking can play a role in that one, particularly software-defined networking. The question is, how are we going to cater for security? Because the question was, it was easy in the on-premises data center, but as we move it out to the edge, right, and with even 5G coming on board as well, and moving more workloads out to the edge and IoT capabilities, for example, to drive new business services and solutions, it's probably easier said than done, right? And especially in a brownfield environment. And that's where the question is coming from. So how do we sort of handle this topic of security?
So if I may, Linus, it's good you bring up the brownfields, right? Because when you say brownfield, I go back to that story where, it's a journey. Nobody, today has a brownfield and tomorrow is fully on cloud. You're going to have a hybrid situation. And so you need, a partnership, both from the partner that delivers it to you and from a technology partner that can carry you on that journey, right? What you do not want to be doing is alternating things there, because that's where things get pretty disruptive. Now, that being said, I go back to the point I made earlier, right? The any-to-any, and we want consistent user experience. What SD-WAN really brings to the table is to eliminate a lot of the complexity that comes with, I am now moving workloads into the cloud. And when we're saying cloud, let's be very honest, right? There's three, if we're looking at Singapore, probably 4 major cloud providers. they all operate in somewhat of a different manner. So, deploying something in cloud A isn't the same as deploying something in cloud B. So we remove some of that complexity so that it stays consistent in, how you deploy it. From a security perspective, I sort of briefly touched on the zero trust model, right? Rather than building a model based on rules where you're disallowing or not allowing certain things for certain locations and certain people, we start from the premise that nothing is allowed unless you explicitly do it so. And that is, by definition, a lot more secure to start off with. And rather than having that only on premise, why don't we push that into the cloud as much as we can? Because then scalability doesn't become an issue. You need more throughput, you need more users. It's automatically there. You do not have to worry about, do I have a physical appliance that is capable of dealing with the scaling up, right? It's in the cloud. However, if you're keeping it hybrid, you want to make sure that two things really happen. One is that user profiling that I mentioned before, and whether that user is on-prem, cloud, or using a mix, it shouldn't really matter. It shouldn't be a complexity for you as an IT manager or as an IT department. That is a complexity we take away. A second thing that we bring is what we like to refer to as end-to-end segmentation, so that if a particular segment of your network gets compromised, it doesn't mean that your entire network gets compromised. And so bringing that in a world end-to-end, truly from the user to the application, that is where I feel that Cisco today has a unique role to play.
So I got another question here, and it's also related to that one. And this is more in terms of the network and data center operation side of things. So think about, again, a brownfield environment. And, Fiona, I'll firstly ask this of you. Think of a customer who obviously didn't have SD-WAN yet at that point in time, and then added SD-WAN. So, a very large complex customer, for example, and how was it done? Because, there are going to be some practicalities and some lifecycle services, obviously, that's going to be involved. It's not just a managed service, right? I'm sure there's probably a lot of design and professional services involved as well when we think about, melding what is possibly a legacy network, with a software-defined network layer on top of it. So walk us through, perhaps, some of the considerations.
I think a lot of enterprises are already grappling with business systems changes, how operations change as they look at digitalization and transforming their network. We do have customers coming to us looking at deploying SD-WAN from nothing. We also do have customers coming to us who have started deploying SD-WAN. We also have customers coming to us who has already deployed SD-WAN, looking at how do they further improve their SD-WAN performance on a network. I think today, as SD-WAN becomes one of the hot topic discussion among enterprises as a means to improve their network performance, I think as far as designing a solution is suitable for their enterprises, for their network, for their workloads, it still takes quite a bit of management along the way. Take, for example, if it's a brand new setup looking at moving to SD-WAN, they'll be concerned about, okay, how do they translate, how do they migrate, how do they make that change, how should they design it in such a way that there will be minimum disruption to their existing operations? How do they design it to make sure that, as far as the quality of experience for the end users are taken care of? Right, and these are really the considerations where we see customers, regardless of which stages of deployment are they at. And then we also do have customers who already start deploying. They're looking at, as their endpoints increases, they find that it's getting increasingly more difficult to manage. They turn to service providers like us to help them to look into how do they better manage it, help them better deliver the network, improve it further. And of course, for customers who are looking at further growing of sites and all that, they turn to service provider to help them manage the end-to-end process, whether is it from a connectivity perspective, is it from a CP delivery? Is it from integration and extending the SD-WAN coverage into cloud, extending into security, and that's what the value of Singtel as a managed service provider brings to these customers, because we help them manage right from the beginning, from a design stage, from a solution stage to design, helping them to migrate, helping them to optimize, and then later help them to manage, to make sure that everything's okay, not just now, and for the service duration when they need a solution. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a fair amount of life cycle services that could leverage on the strengths of a larger services provider who's been doing it at scale as well, and have the capability to drive a lot of the new solutions and technology architectures. We have also another question, and this is a question from someone in the audience as well, and I'll address it to Danny. On the security aspect, how can SD-WAN help on branch where there is limited resources, like no firewall and IDP, and backhauling these facilities to the hub to take up additional resources?
Sure. So it really goes back to the zero trust model that I mentioned before, where we're basically saying we create what is called a secure internet gateway, where we really host all of the features that you just mentioned, be it IDS, IPS, URL filtering, even next generation firewall, are all hosted in the cloud. The only thing that you should concern yourself about in that particular case is what kind of throughput would I be requiring from that particular location? And that is how we size it. We typically go by number of seats or number of users, if you will, and an average bandwidth that these would consume. And that will be part of your subscription. So we really take away the need of having to deploy anything on-prem. We move it into either the cloud or into your hub within the data center.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. That's a great reminder on some of the reasons that we're seeing SD-WAN come up again. Now, so let's switch gears now and focus a little bit on Singtel's capabilities. Yeah, how has managed services evolved for Singtel? Because I've been following Singtel managed services for a long time. With plain vanilla, what I call plain vanilla CPE management capabilities. So could you try to answer that, Fiona?
I think with the SD-WAN, it's really different, because with SD-WAN it opens up to possibilities of a lot more capabilities than just plain vanilla CPE. Because of it being software defined, because of capabilities, it allows customers to do more. I think really when it comes to these capabilities, what service providers like us we also do is that we try to put this together so it provides a more end-to-end solution for the customer. Let me give you an example. So take for example in the area of visibility. So because all these are software defined, there are metrics to tell customers how their SD-WANs are performing. And for service provider like us, what do is we don't just want to show customer how does their SD-WAN perform, right? We want to integrate it with connectivity. We integrate it if they have extension to the cloud. If they do have integrated security solutions or with SD-WAN, we want to integrate that together as well. So that on a single portal, they get this amount of metrics, this amount of insights. They could easily use all this information to better optimize and drive business outcomes, right? To bring that experience, to bring that performance to the end users who are using the network. And really because of that very rich analytics that we can get as we pull all this together, we also what we try to do is we try to develop intelligence to provide those the proactive and predictive thoughts, so that in the event of what happening, the troubleshooting efforts actually occurs immediately. And from at the end of the day, it's really about, from a customer experience perspective, it helps us bring a better user experience to our customers. And from a customer perspective, they enjoy using the service because it's fast free. They spend less time managing the network, spend more time on driving digitalization efforts, right? really these are the things that we try to piece together. These are not really that straightforward. It's not just about putting in a portal through APIs. We need to align and review systems, processes, so that we can actually piece this all together, and then make that a seamless experience. Yeah.
Yeah. So I also noticed the Singtel group has a new managing director. Could you walk us through a little bit of the investments that Singtel is making to ensure it's fit for the future needs of customers?
I think one thing for sure is that when we look at dealing with new services, frankly new services are not how it used to be. Take for example, if you asked me last year this time, we wouldn't have anticipated how networking would change to adapt to the current new normal now, right? So what we have actually embarked on over the past couple of years is that we step up a lot more on having regular discussions with customers, understanding their needs. We go into service co-creation with customers through validation sessions, through focus groups, through demos, through proof of concepts. And really that's how we define how we want to invest on our services and our systems. Through this co-create sessions that we have with customers, it really helps us to understand better what customers are looking for in the near term and the long term. And then when we build our services towards that, it helps us to create services that our customers will be interested in and they would use a lot, but that they will use in the future. And some of the things that we develop out of these validations are, it brings about investment in the areas of, us trying to build our global SD-WAN gateways for us to then improve customer experience, network performance, regardless of where the customers is at. Give them better deterministic routing from locations to locations. And then, of course, there are also customers who say, hey, I'm interested in all these new things that you are doing. I want to understand a bit more on the services and how does solutions actually stitch up or put together. Because really, it's not just about SD-WAN. Customers also look at, how it integrates it into their network. We also think, because of that, we also find that, then we also build up our customer experience centers. So through customer experience centers, we are able to use it to demonstrate the benefits of what SD-WAN can provide to our customers, to help them to simulate network scenarios and validate designs that are suitable for what customers be interested to deploy. And of course, these are the things that we piece together. Of course, along with it comes with the systems, the people, the process, operations, put them on to speed so that we deliver that the co-creation of services that we want with our customers, do this together, and then move forward to bring solutions that will help businesses in the next 3 to 5 years. Yeah.
Well, thanks for that, Fiona. And on that note, we're almost at the top of the hour. Thank you so much for your time and participation, everyone. I'd like to remind everyone to fill out the survey forms because that's very useful for the feedback for all of us. I'd like to thank Fiona and Danny as well for your time and participation in this event. Have a good day, everyone. See you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Linus, Danny, and Fiona for the insightful session. Now that we have come to the end of the webcast, I would like to bring your attention to the survey button again, where you may complete the feedback form in exchange for a Grab voucher. Once again, thank you for taking the time to join us. Stay safe and take care.